Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Michaela Peters. Today I'm going to talk to you about how my perception of mental health changed after living in Finland. And while this may be a bit controversial or maybe not so interesting, I definitely know that traveling is interesting. So if not, I'll just continue to talk more about that and NASA because those things are interesting. Uh, I do think this is an important topic or one that I at least care about now, so that's why I'd like to make a video about it. And worst case, it's not very successful. So I think that this is actually a process that most international people living in Finland go through. I do think it was very interesting that the introduction that I had to actually talking about mental health was not with Europeans or Finnish people, but actually with Russian people. And I now have decided that I think that most Russian people have an at least working knowledge of psychology. One of my Russian friends in the US helped me to understand this because in the US we look at self improvement as related to financial gain, whereas in Russia it has much more to do with the achievement of different goals that are not necessarily financial, but maybe being able to perform well or knowing different languages or being good at sports. I mean, we do care about sports here in the US from a, especially college sports perspective, or being able to get scholarships for universities, of course. But I think that the whole working on yourself in a mental capacity, not just in terms of achievements, but in terms of maybe self-regulation is much more common with Russian people than with Americans. That's been my observation, at least. Now, in terms of Finnish people, I think that, well, one of the things that I thought was very funny when I started hanging out with Finnish people, or maybe these are just my friends, are like the amount of mental health related jokes that they'll make, which I'm going to be very honest, I kind of did enjoy those because how do you talk about difficult topics besides making jokes about them? This is what one of my Finnish friends had said to me, like when he would joke about things that were more serious. He's like, how do you talk about them if you don't joke about them? Which I think is a good point and a good way to look at it. So I think one of the reasons why this happens to a lot of international students living in Finland is it is very difficult for international students. I already explained that that has to do with being able to make friends, but aside from that, the weather is insane. I mean, obviously everybody knows that, and that's a reason why Finland is not, the first place that everybody's trying to immigrate to, because yes, the winters can be very hard. When people ask me, yeah, how are the winters there? I'm like, I will never get seasonally depressed living in New Jersey ever again. And I used to, but there's just no comparison. Like, I think that winters here are now a joke. I mean, maybe it has to do with the length of the winter and really just the lack of access to sunlight for such a long time. And then the sunlight that is just not there between, like, I don't know, December and February. Those are the months I had the hardest time with. A lot of people will say November is bad because there's no snow and the snow lightens everything up. I just think that the residual effect of being exposed to such little sunlight does not catch up with me until sometime in February or March. Those are really hard months for me. Sometimes January is hard too, but I'd say February is probably the worst month for me, even though it's already starting to get light out because the solstice already happened a month ago. I'm sure I'd have people disagree with me, and I'd be curious to hear about that in the comments below. So I think considering the weather especially, and then that the weather can contribute to isolation because naturally if it's freezing outside, you don't want to just go walk outside and be outside and casually run into people. So there were a lot of times I know that me as a student in the winter, I just wouldn't want to go anywhere. I would just stay at home the whole day doing my work, and then that even still sounds depressing to me. So I understand why I was starting to face a lot of challenges there. I think it also made it so that I became very emotionally dependent on the few close friends that I had, which was something I never experienced ever in my life, especially those who were my roommates. And you obviously don't choose your roommates. And so I honestly really did have a lot of friendship issues living in Finland, and that wasn't really something maybe it's something I struggled with when I was like a kid, but it wasn't something I'd struggled with in my adult life. And I think that also forced me to become more aware of, maybe I do have some of my own mental health challenges, which I really think that those are more common than a lot of people give them credit for. And again, I know it's a taboo topic to talk about, but I do think it's important to talk about it to help destigmatize it and make people feel less alone in their struggles surrounding those kinds of issues. So that's, I guess, what I'm advocating for in this video. Now, one of the other things that I found interesting was having one Finnish friend who, and I thought that this was very funny, the way that she talked about this. She was saying both her and then this other guy she was dating were on happy pills, so antidepressants. And I know that that's also a super taboo thing to talk about, and then people say that Finland consumes like the most antidepressants. I don't think that's true. I think it might actually be Iceland. I did actually have a layover in Iceland twice within the last week, and it was very overcast both days that I flew in and out of there. So I can kind of see why that would be more of an issue in Iceland. Yeah, I was like, wow. I remember the weather being kind of really difficult in September, October timeframe when I first came to Finland in 2021, because it was like gray skies every day, and I was like, okay, how am I going to get through this? And the answer was, it was not easy. I think I actually started taking melatonin for the first time in my life living in Finland. I think in addition to just not understanding the wake sleep cycle of, this is different lighting, like sunlight, than natural sunlight than I'm used to. It was also just, feeling loneliness. I did read something yesterday that talked about how loneliness can actually be a useful emotion because it will motivate you to go out and seek interactions with other people that you would then need to feel less lonely. And so I think that was actually another struggle that I faced living in Finland was, if I'm comparing studying in Finland to studying in the US is very into having all these extracurricular kinds of activities that are related to sports, as I just explained. So when I was studying at my 4-year university in the US, there were things I could join like swim club, running club. As I talked about in my other video, I'm not very coordinated. But the only activities that were available to me in a sports capacity in Finland were very coordinated activities like rugby, also riding a horse. I'm like a little bit afraid of riding horses. I don't know why. I think maybe because one time when I was in Kyrgyzstan, I had a horse that I was riding that was acting up and was kicking the other horse. I don't know. I don't know where this like mini phobia of horses comes from, but I I have one. So that probably wasn't going to be one of the activities I was going to join. And I can't think of any other activities that were available to me, really. I mean, maybe there was choir or something, but I thought you needed to know Finnish for that. A couple of the Americans I studied with, not knowing Finnish, did join that. So in retrospect, I'm like, okay, maybe I could have done that, even though I've never learned to read music, so I'm not sure that that would have gone so well. I do love karaoke in Finland. Oh, that's one of the reasons I really would love to be there. I love how you can go to the middle of nowhere and there's always a karaoke bar. I think Russia's a little bit like that too. But I love that. Karaoke bars where I live, it's very densely populated and we don't even really have them. So you have to go to New York City, which I very honestly don't like going there. It's too expensive and it's just a lot of people. It's overwhelming. Don't like that. Okay. So yeah, I think that because there aren't a lot of activities that are very sports related, which is what I'm used to doing and that, is good for your mental health, a lot of activities were drinking related. So anytime you're going out to do something that's social, it's like, oh yes, it's an alcoholic thing. Maybe not alcoholic's a strong word for it. And I know I got a lot of different comments on the alcoholic tendency of Finns in general in my other video, but that was just something that's very different to me. And yes, of course that stuff exists everywhere. It exists in the US and there's a party culture at any sort of, university, but I wasn't used to the fact that most social activities were going to have alcohol involved, which, is fine, but I think it's also the level of drinking that you see with Finnish people was high, and maybe it's that way in the US too. I don't know, because I never really had time to be in those situations in the US, but it felt like they were just very abundant in Finland. Like, oh, you go to sauna, alcohol. Oh, you go to some international student party, alcohol. Like, or it's really an activity, like, oh, we're all gonna make food from other countries and share it with each other. And I don't know, and I know people feel differently about, their comfort level being around people who are drinking, and that's what I saw a lot of. Some of the people I studied with, some of them didn't want to be around these situations at all. Some of them would be fine with being there and other people drinking, but them not, whatever. But I think that probably the level of alcohol and Finland that I saw was just very different than anything I'd been exposed to. Like the fact that people can drink on the street and that's fine. I had one time, I didn't know what the guy said to me, this older guy in Helsinki just offered me vodka and I was just like, "Ei, kiitos." And then he kept trying to offer and I was just like, I don't know what he's saying, so "Ei, kiitos." And yeah, no thanks. So I don't know. I think that sometimes maybe these challenges around the weather can manifest in terms of people drinking, because obviously, drinking is a drug. Just like one that's not a bad one. I don't know. A legal drug. There we go. So, yeah, I think that the culmination of all of these things that I was used to having access to in the US that didn't really exist there, and then me needing to change the way that I went out and got my social interaction, maybe created some challenges for me, especially very initially. I remember the first winter being very, very hard. Then by the time it was the second winter, I already knew what to expect, so it wasn't as difficult. But I do think that it opened my eyes to being more aware of my own mental health, or that mental health even exists or something that I should be concerned with. Because very honestly, living in the US, I think it's much more like, and I'm sure Finnish people will agree with this, the struggle is real. Finnish people seem to have a perception that the US is kind of a poor country. And compared to Finland, that's totally true. I mean, the amount of inequality here is nothing like that which you'd ever see in Finland. So yeah, I don't know. But I guess that's kind of everything that I have for today. Talking about how I became more aware of mental health after living in Finland, and it motivated me maybe to investigate the subject more thoroughly. I think that's how I got into reading psychology articles as a hobby and becoming more aware of my feelings. I also really respected how much Finnish people were able to just like very candidly express, like, I think one of the first things that I had happen in terms of what I'm trying to explain was one of my friends was explaining how his grandfather died, and he's like, yeah, it was really hard for me. Like, I think that in the US, people won't just say stuff like that, because saying that something was hard for you, for some reason, I think is kind of perceived as weakness. Like, this, maybe it's like a lack of vulnerability that we as Americans have, because we think we need to be very hardworking, and this does make sense in the sense that America is a country of immigrants and people came here to work hard and really fend for themselves. So people talking so openly about emotions, both good and bad, I think in the US we actually only talk about good emotions most of the time. And I remember reading an article about how this is actually reflected in our, what are they called in English? Sometimes I think of the word in Russian. The children's stories, like the different children's tales. That all the ones that we have are mostly just about things that are happy. Which I was telling my one Russian friend who lives in the US that I remember watching the Danish version of The Little Mermaid, and in the end she dies. And I was maybe somewhere between, maybe around 8 years old. And I remember being so traumatized by this. Like, oh my gosh, I can't believe she died. Why did she jump off the boat? And that was like the most distressing thing to me. And then my friend is like, I can't believe you didn't know that that's what actually happens in The Little Mermaid. Well, if you watch all the Disney movies, they all have a happy ending. So we're not, I think that as a country, we're not really good at tolerating negative things. Like, we're very averse to things that make our lives more inconvenient. Like, we don't want to talk about when things are going badly. And I think it is a sign of weakness, or we perceive it that way. And I think that these were the adjustments I had to make mentally when coming to Finland, and also just what people talk about. Like, people talk about honestly deeper topics, I think, than Americans. We Americans like to talk a lot about, oh, I did this, I need to do this. Like, everything is about doing, and I know that there's a difference in sociology between doing cultures and being cultures. So I think that, and that was something that always really stressed me out about being in the US, if I'm being very honest. I didn't like how people were always like verbally competing with who is busier. I just kind of thought that was ridiculous. So that's something that I really came to appreciate in Finland was like people willing to have more honest, open discussions about the way that things affected them, because I think that that's something that we just don't have as much here. And that's honestly something that I miss very deeply when I'm in the US. I find that when I'm in the US, I spend a lot more time alone, because I don't like being around these discussions where I need to do this, and it kind of stresses me out, because I'm like, oh, I need to also do things. So I just spend a lot of time actually doing things and not really being who I am, maybe. Unless who I am is a workaholic, which is, I'm going to be honest, somewhat true while I'm here. And I talked about that in another one of my videos, that I think that when I'm in the US, I have a tendency to work a lot. And it's something that I didn't have in Finland, and something that I really miss, and something that was very hard for me to leave with my life there. So, will I be in the US forever? Most people think probably not, but for now I am here most of the time. Alright, well, thank you for watching this video. I hope it was interesting. I love hearing your comments below. They're so entertaining to me, especially the ones from Finnish people, because I also love talking to Finnish people too, even though I still don't speak Finnish, but maybe I will one day. Alright, so until the next video, I guess I still need to make one about NASA. I keep promising that, and then maybe also about traveling and showing some places where I was. You can let me know what you think is interesting. Alright, thank you everybody, and we're going into the weekend, so have a nice weekend. Bye!